Welcome to the deep dive. You ready to get philosophical?
Always.
Today we're tackling Aristotle, one of the biggest names in Western thought, and for good reason.
Yeah, his ideas have had a massive ripple effect across every field you can think of.
We're diving deep into some excerpts from a Spanish language book about him, and trust me, this is way more than just Aristotle's greatest hits.
Oh yeah, we're going way beyond just the surface level stuff.
Yeah, we really want to get to the core of his thinking.
The how and the why behind it all.
Exactly. What were his methods? What were those big concepts he's known for? And why should we still care today?
Because believe it or not, his ideas are still super relevant.
And get this in our deep dive. We actually found out that Aristotle might have missed out on a major leadership role.
Oh, why is that?
Well, apparently he wasn't always the easiest guy to get along with.
That's interesting.
Even Plato himself said of Aristotle, and I'm quoting here, "He kicks against me like a colt against its mother."
Wow. So even brilliant minds can have a bit of an edge to them.
I guess so. But the dynamic between Aristotle and Plato is actually a perfect place to start our exploration.
Totally. I mean, Aristotle spent 20 years at Plato's Academy.
Yeah.
Right? So that had to have a massive impact on his thinking.
Yeah, huge influence. But what's fascinating is how he took those teachings and then developed his own unique approach to knowledge.
Right, because Plato was all about those forms that existed beyond the physical world, those perfect blueprints for everything to see.
Exactly. But Aristotle, while he totally valued logic and systematic thinking, he was much more grounded in observation and what we might call common sense.
He was all about the details of the natural world.
Wanted to understand how things worked in a practical way.
Hands-on kind of guy.
So not just sitting around theorizing about abstract concepts, he was out there observing the world.
Using his observations to shape his philosophy.
And that's one of the things that makes Aristotle so relevant today, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
He shows us that intellectual growth often involves questioning what's already been established.
Even if it comes from someone as brilliant as Plato.
It's about forming our own understanding of the world based on what we observe and how we think critically.
And that's something we can all do.
It's kind of inspiring, right?
Yeah.
To think that we can all be philosophers in our own way.
Totally. Just by being curious about the world and questioning what we think we know.
Exactly. And speaking of being a philosopher, it's hard to overstate just how broad Aristotle's work actually was.
Oh yeah, we're talking logic, physics, metaphysics, ethics,
politics,
poetry,
and even marine biology.
He's considered the founder of that field.
Hold up, marine biology, studying fish.
Yep. He was fascinated by all aspects of the natural world.
I had no idea.
And he made some incredibly insightful observations about marine life.
Okay, my mind is officially blown, and to think that we only have fragments of his writings left.
Most of it's been lost to history.
It's kind of crazy to imagine what else he might have uncovered.
Right. But even from what we do have, it's clear that Aristotle wasn't just collecting facts. He was developing rigorous methods for studying them.
Yeah, he was categorizing knowledge into theoretical, practical, and productive sciences.
Exactly. He was interested in the what, but also the how.
The how we know things, the how we categorize information, and the how we use that knowledge to make sense of the world.
Which brings us to his insights on logic.
Okay, and especially his work in what we now call the corpus Aristotelicum.
Right.
This has had a huge impact on how we learn and think even today.
It's true.
Think about it when you break down a complex problem into smaller parts, when you look for patterns and connections, you're using tools that Aristotle helped develop.
You are.
Okay, so tell me more about this corpus Aristotelicum. What is it exactly?
Well, it's not just a random collection of his writings. It was actually carefully organized by a scholar named Andronicus of Rhodes back in the 1st century BC.
Wow, and this organization has shaped how we've studied Aristotle for centuries.
It's like the greatest hits album of philosophy.
I love that. Okay, so logic was basically the foundation for everything else.
Yeah, the essential tool for rigorous inquiry.
But he saw it as more than just a set of formal rules, right? Right. For Aristotle, logic was about understanding the structure of language and how that structure reflects the structure of reality itself.
So it's like our language is a mirror reflecting the world around us.
So it's a great way to put it.
Okay, that's pretty deep.
And this is where his idea of categories comes in.
Categories.
Yeah, he identified these 10 fundamental categories that represent the basic ways we can talk about and think about the world.
Things like
substance, quantity, quality, relational. They're like the building blocks of our understanding.
So he's basically giving us a framework for how our minds make sense of reality.
He is. And this idea of categories has had a huge impact.
It's not just some old philosophical concept, right?
Nope. Aristotle's work on categories has influenced fields like linguistics, computer science, even artificial intelligence.
Wow.
It's all about breaking down complex ideas into their fundamental components, understanding relationships, making connections.
So Aristotle's not just some ancient philosopher whose ideas are locked away in libraries. Nope.
He's given us tools that we still use every day, whether we realize it or not.
That's right.
It's like this intellectual toolkit for navigating the world.
I like that. And that leads us to another fascinating area of Aristotle's work, metaphysics.
Metaphysics. Okay, that sounds pretty deep.
It is. It's all about those big existential questions, like what does it mean to exist? What is the nature of being?
Okay, I'm following.
And what's really interesting is that Aristotle's approach to metaphysics was very different from Plato's.
Okay, so we're moving from the tools of thinking logic to the nature of reality itself, metaphysics.
We are.
But how was Aristotle different from Plato?
Well, remember how Plato was all about those abstract forms?
Mm-hmm.
For Aristotle, the real action was happening right here in the concrete world of individual things.
Okay.
He called these individual things substances, and he believed they were the fundamental building blocks of reality.
So instead of focusing on some perfect abstract form of a chair, Aristotle was interested in the actual chair you're sitting on right now.
Exactly. He was focused on the thisness of something, its unique and particular existence.
I like that thisness.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. Aristotle didn't believe in a vacuum.
Like the thing you clean your floors with?
No, like nothingness. He thought the universe was literally packed with substances all interacting and influencing one another.
Wow, so everything is constantly bumping up against everything else, no space for emptiness.
Right. And it just shows how grounded Aristotle's philosophy was in his observations of the natural world.
He was looking at how things actually behaved.
And trying to develop a system of thought that explained it all.
And speaking of observations, he seemed particularly interested in movement.
Oh yeah, he saw it as a fundamental characteristic of the physical world.
But wasn't he thinking of movement in a much broader sense than we usually do?
Absolutely. He wasn't just talking about objects changing location. For Aristotle, movement encompassed any kind of change, growth, decay, transformation, anything that involved a transition over time.
So like a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly, that's a form of movement.
Exactly.
Okay, I never thought about it like that.
And he actually categorized these different types of movement.
He did.
He did. He talked about generation and corruption, the processes of things coming into being and passing away.
Makes sense.
Then there's alteration, a change in quality, like fruit ripening, and increase and decrease, changes in quantity, like a plant growing taller.
Okay.
And of course, there's translation, which is just a change in location.
So he's taking this abstract concept of movement and breaking it down into concrete, relatable examples.
He was great at that, connecting abstract ideas to the real world.
Makes it so much easier to grasp.
It does.
It's making me think about all the ways that things are constantly changing around us, even the stuff we might not notice.
It's like a whole new layer of reality.
It is. And this focus on change leads us to another key concept in Aristotle's philosophy, actuality and potentiality.
Yes.
Okay, explain this one to me.
So he argued that things exist in their current form, their actuality.
Okay.
But they also possess the potential to change their potentiality.
So an acorn is actually an acorn, but it has the potential to become an oak tree.
You got it. And for Aristotle, this transition from potentiality to actuality is what drives all change in the universe.
Wow. It's like this constant unfolding a movement from what something is to what it could be.
Exactly.
Okay, so with all this talk of movement and change, I'm curious how Aristotle viewed the universe as a whole.
Well, that brings us to his model of the cosmos, which might sound a bit familiar and a bit outdated.
Okay, let's hear it.
Aristotle believed in a geocentric universe, meaning he thought the Earth was at the center, with everything revolving around it.
So basically, he thought Earth was the VIP of the cosmos.
That's one way to put it.
Okay, but we know that's not accurate, right?
Right, thanks to Copernicus and Galileo, who came along much later.
So how did he come up with this idea?
Well, remember, he was working with the knowledge and observations available at the time.
I guess before telescopes, it would have been hard to imagine things any other way.
It would have. Plus, his model was also heavily influenced by philosophical ideas about the perfection of circular motion.
Okay, I can see that.
But what's interesting is that even though his model of the universe was different, he was still asking those big questions about the causes of movement.
He didn't just want to describe what was happening. He wanted to understand why.
Exactly. And this led him to develop his theory of the four causes.
The four causes.
The formal cause, the material cause, the efficient cause, and the final cause.
Okay, break it down for me. What are these all about?
Okay, imagine a beautiful marble statue.
Okay.
The formal cause is the shape or design of the statue, the sculptor's vision of what it should look like.
Okay.
The material cause is the material it's made of, in this case, marble.
Makes sense.
The efficient cause is the agent that brought it into being, the sculptor who chiseled the marble into its final form.
Okay.
And the final cause is the purpose or goal for which the statue was created, maybe to beautify a temple or to commemorate a leader.
Wow, that's a really comprehensive way of looking at something.
It is. It's not just about what something is made of or who made it. It's about the idea behind it and its purpose.
I can see how you could apply that to all kinds of things, not just statues.
You can. And what's remarkable is that even though Aristotle's model of the universe was different, his focus on understanding causes is something that still resonates with modern science.
We're still asking those why questions, trying to figure out the underlying principles that govern the universe.
Exactly.
So Aristotle wasn't just speculating about things he couldn't know. He was laying the groundwork for a whole way of thinking.
He was.
A way of thinking that's still relevant today.
It is.
Okay, my brain is officially full.
I know we've covered a lot.
From the foundations of logic to Aristotle's view of the cosmos.
But there's still so much more to explore.
I'm ready for it.
All right, let's dive back in. All right, so we've talked about logic, the cosmos, even marble statues. Where do we go from here?
Okay, yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, but what else is there?
Well, let's talk about Aristotle's concept of the good life, that idea of eudaimonia.
Right, that state of flourishing, living well.
Exactly. But remember, for Aristotle, this wasn't just about individual happiness. He saw humans as inherently social beings.
Like political animals, as he called them, right?
Exactly. He believed that connection with others was key to a fulfilling life.
We're not meant to be isolated hermits or anything?
Nope. And that's where his ideas about politics come into play.
Okay, so how did he view politics?
For Aristotle, politics wasn't just about governing a state. It was about creating the conditions for individuals to live virtuous and meaningful lives.
Interesting. So he saw it as like a way to actually help people achieve that eudaimonia.
That's right. He believed that a well-ordered society could actually support people in their quest for the good life.
So it's like our personal well-being is intertwined with the well-being of our community.
Exactly. We can't truly flourish in a dysfunctional or unjust society.
That makes sense.
And that's why Aristotle put so much emphasis on politics. He even called it the master art.
The master art.
Yeah, because he saw it as encompassing all the other arts and sciences, guiding them toward the common good.
I never thought about politics that way.
It's like this grand orchestration,
Right.
trying to create a society where everyone has a chance to thrive.
Exactly. Okay, but how do we achieve this harmonious society according to Aristotle?
Well, he believed that the best form of government aims at the happiness of all its citizens, not just a select few.
Okay, that sounds fair.
He actually argued against both tyranny and pure democracy.
Why is that?
He saw them as prone to extremes and instability.
So too much power in the hands of one person or group can be just as bad as too much power in the hands of the masses.
Exactly. Instead, he favored a system he called a polity.
A polity, what's that?
A mixed system that combined elements of both.
So finding that balance again, like with the golden mean.
Precisely. Aristotle recognized that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to government.
Makes sense. A system that works in one place might not work somewhere else.
Right. The best system for a particular society depends on its unique circumstances and the character of its people.
It's about adapting to the specific context.
It is. But even though the specific form of government might differ, Aristotle's emphasis on balance, moderation, and the common good is something that's still relevant today.
It's pretty amazing how ideas from thousands of years ago can still speak to us.
They do. Okay, so let's zoom back in from the grand scale of societies to the individual pursuit of the good life.
Okay, sounds good.
We talked about the importance of virtue, but how are we supposed to actually cultivate these virtues?
Yeah, is there like a secret formula or something?
I wish. Sadly, there's no magic potion for becoming virtuous.
Darn.
But Aristotle does offer some guidance. Remember his idea of the golden mean.
Right, finding that sweet spot between the extremes.
Exactly. He believed that finding that balance was crucial for developing virtues.
Okay, but how do we know what that sweet spot actually is? It seems like it could be pretty subjective.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And Aristotle acknowledged that finding the mean isn't always easy.
So how do we do it?
It requires careful judgment and consideration of the specific circumstances. He didn't think we should just blindly follow rules.
So what did he suggest instead?
He emphasized developing practical wisdom, what he called phronesis.
Phronesis.
All right.
Okay, that's a new one.
It's often translated as practical wisdom or prudence. It's the ability to discern the right course of action in a particular situation.
So it's about understanding the nuances of life and making sound judgments based on experience, reason, and good character.
That's a great summary. It's like knowing when to speak up and when to hold back, or knowing when to be generous and when to be firm.
Right, it's like having that gut feeling, but it's also based on wisdom and experience.
Exactly. And Aristotle believed that phronesis is essential for living a virtuous life.
It's like the compass that guides us through all the complexity.
It is.
So we need both the virtues themselves and this practical wisdom to guide us.
We do. It's like having a map and knowing how to use it.
Perfect analogy. And this is where Aristotle's emphasis on habit comes in. He believed that we develop virtues through practice, right?
Right. It's not just about knowing what's right. It's about repeatedly making good choices and acting in virtuous ways.
It's like learning to play a musical instrument or mastering a skill.
It takes consistent effort and practice
to develop those habits and make them second nature.
Exactly. Okay, so I'm curious, what did Aristotle think about pleasure?
Yeah, like, is it something we should avoid if we want to live a virtuous life?
That's a great question. It's like this age-old debate, right? Does true happiness mean giving up all the fun stuff?
It does feel that way sometimes.
Well, Aristotle, being the nuanced thinker he was, had a really interesting take on pleasure.
Okay, I'm listening.
He recognized that pleasure is a natural part of the human experience.
Makes sense.
And he didn't think we should deny ourselves all enjoyment. In fact, he saw pleasure as a kind of feedback mechanism.
The feedback mechanism.
Yeah, indicating that we're engaging in activities that are good for us.
So it's like our body's way of saying, hey, keep doing that. It's good for you.
Yeah. Exactly. But here's the thing. Aristotle distinguished between different kinds of pleasure.
Different kinds. Okay.
He said some pleasures are fleeting and ultimately harmful, leading us away from virtue and eudaimonia.
So, like, what kind of pleasures are we talking about here?
He's talking about the pleasures that come from indulging our base desires. Things like overeating, excessive drinking, pursuing wealth and status, just for the sake of it.
So those things might feel good in the moment, but they don't lead to true lasting happiness.
Right. It's like those instant gratification traps we all fall into sometimes.
You get that temporary pleasure, but then you end up feeling empty or even regretful afterward.
Exactly. But Aristotle argued that there are other pleasures that are aligned with virtue and actually contribute to our well-being.
Okay, so what are those?
These are the pleasures that come from engaging in activities that are good for our souls. Things like intellectual pursuits, creative endeavors, building meaningful relationships, acts of kindness and compassion.
So it's not about pleasure versus virtue. It's about finding the right kinds of pleasure, the ones that are in harmony with our desire to be good people.
You got it. And it takes that practical wisdom, that phronesis, to know the difference, to make choices that lead us toward eudaimonia, both for ourselves and for our communities.
So it all comes back to balance again.
It does. It's about aligning our actions with our values and finding that sweet spot where pleasure and virtue can coexist.
It's amazing how all these pieces of Aristotle's thought fit together. Logic, ethics, politics, even pleasure. They all point toward this idea of living a life that's in line with our rational nature and our social nature.
It really is a remarkable system of thought, and it's a testament to the power of his ideas that we're still grappling with them today.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
I'm glad to hear that.
But before we wrap up our exploration of Aristotle, is there anything else we should know about his take on the human experience?
Well, in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore Aristotle's fascinating insights into psychology and the workings of the mind.
Now that sounds really intriguing. I'm ready to explore the inner workings of the human experience Aristotle style. All right, we're back for the final part of our Aristotelian adventure.
Ready to wrap things up?
I am. We've covered so much ground already. Logic, the cosmos, politics, even pleasure, all through the lens of this ancient Greek philosopher.
He really did cover a lot of ground.
He did. But now it's time to explore something that feels super relevant to us today.
Okay, what's that?
Psychology. I'm so fascinated by how Aristotle approached the human mind.
It is fascinating.
Especially considering that he lived way before modern neuroscience and brain scans and all that.
You're right to be fascinated. Even without those tools, he made some incredibly insightful observations about human psychology.
So where do we even begin with Aristotle's take on psychology?
Well, his treatise On the Soul is a great place to start.
On the Soul, okay.
In it, he really digs into what it means to be alive, to have experiences, to interact with the world, to be a conscious being.
So he's trying to understand that spark of life, that animating principle that makes us more than just a bunch of physical matter.
Exactly. And for Aristotle, the soul, or psyche as he called it, wasn't some separate ethereal entity floating around in our bodies.
Not like a ghost in the machine.
Nope. He saw the soul as an integral part of a living organism inseparable from the physical body.
So it's more like the soul is the very essence of what makes something alive and functioning in the world.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And being Aristotle, he loved to categorize things.
Of course it did.
So he applied this approach to the soul as well, identifying different types of souls based on their capacities.
Okay, I'm ready for the Aristotelian soul chart.
All right, so he starts with plants. They have what he called a nutritive soul,
Oh!
which allows them to take in nourishment, grow, and reproduce.
Makes sense. Plants got to do their plant things.
Right. Then there are animals which have a sensitive soul.
Sensitive soul.
This means they can sense and respond to their environment, experience things like pleasure and pain, and even exhibit basic forms of learning.
So plants can grow, animals can feel, and then there's us humans. Where do we fit in?
Humans, according to Aristotle, have a rational soul.
Rational. So, okay. I like the sound of that.
This gives us the capacity for thought language, deliberate action, all the things that set us apart from other living beings.
So we're at the top of the soul hierarchy.
You could say that.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that he's not saying our rational soul is totally separate from the other types.
Right. It's like we have the plant and animal souls built in, and then this extra layer of rationality on top.
That's a great way to see it. It highlights how interconnected all living things are.
While still acknowledging what makes humans unique.
Exactly. And for Aristotle, this rational soul wasn't just about thinking deep thoughts. It was about understanding the world, making judgments, acting in accordance with reason.
So our ability to reason is key to living a good life, to achieving that eudaimonia.
It is.
But how did Aristotle see this reasoning process actually working? Did he break it down into different parts?
He did. And it's amazing how some of his insights actually align with modern cognitive psychology.
Really? Like what?
Well, for example, Aristotle recognized the importance of perception, how we gather information about the world through our senses.
Right, we see, hear, smell, taste, touch. That's how we experience things.
Exactly. But he also emphasized the role of what he called common sense,
Sense.
or sensus communis in Latin.
Fancy.
But don't think of it as just everyday intuition. Aristotle saw this as a crucial faculty that integrates sensory information and helps us form a coherent picture of the world.
So it's not just about seeing a bunch of separate things. It's about putting those pieces together to understand what's going on.
Exactly. Like, hey, that loud roaring sound is probably a lion and I should probably get out of here.
Right, exactly. It's about connecting the dots, making sense of our surroundings.
It is. And from there, Aristotle identified other important mental faculties like imagination, our ability to form mental images, and memory, our ability to store and recall information.
Okay, those are definitely important.
He saw these as essential for learning, problem-solving, decision-making.
It's incredible how he was building up this whole model of the mind without the scientific tools we have today.
It is.
Okay, but what about emotions? Where do they fit into this Aristotelian picture of the mind?
Well, this is where Aristotle gets really insightful.
Okay, tell me more.
He understood that emotions can have a powerful influence on our judgments and our actions.
I mean, yeah, sometimes they completely take over.
They can. But unlike some philosophers who saw emotions as something to be suppressed or controlled,
Okay.
Aristotle believed that we can actually cultivate and shape our emotions through reason and habit.
So it's not about pretending we don't have emotions.
Right.
It's about acknowledging them and working with them in a healthy way.
Exactly. And this idea has been super influential in fields like psychotherapy and emotional intelligence.
It's like he was ahead of his time.
He was. He was basically saying that we can learn to manage our emotions, to develop emotional resilience, and use our emotions in a way that supports our well-being.
That's so empowering. We're not just victims of our emotions.
Right, we can learn to work with them.
Okay, but what about when things go wrong? I mean, we all make mistakes. We lose our tempers. We act impulsively. Sometimes, did Aristotle have anything to say about those moments when our emotions get the better of us?
He did. And it brings us to a really important part of his ethical teachings, the idea of moral responsibility and the possibility of change.
So he wasn't just about setting these high standards for virtue and then saying, too bad if you can't meet them.
Not at all. Aristotle was a realist. He recognized that humans are fallible.
We mess up, we give in to temptation, we do things we regret.
We do. But he also believed that We have the capacity to learn from those mistakes, to change our habits and strive to be better.
That's a good message. It means we're not doomed by our past mistakes.
Right, we have the power to grow and change.
So how do we do that according to Aristotle?
Well, he said this process of moral growth involves both intellectual and practical elements.
Okay, I'm listening.
We need to understand the principles of virtue, what's right and good. But we also need to develop the habits and the willpower to act accordingly, even when it's tough.
So it's one thing to know what we should do, but it's another thing entirely to actually do it consistently.
Exactly. It's like knowing we should eat healthy and exercise, but then reaching for the cookies and skipping the gym.
It's the classic knowing-doing gap we all struggle with.
It is. But Aristotle gives us hope. He's saying that through practice, through consciously choosing the right path over and over again, we can strengthen our willpower and develop those virtuous habits.
So it's like building a muscle. The more we exercise our virtue muscle, the stronger it gets.
That's a great way to think about it.
Right.
And Aristotle believed that this process of moral development is ongoing. It's a lifelong journey of self-improvement.
Always striving to be better.
Exactly. Striving to become more virtuous, more rational, more fully realized as human beings.
I love that it's not about reaching some end point of perfect virtue. It's about this continuous process of learning, growing, becoming the best version of ourselves that we can be.
That's the essence of Aristotle's philosophy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just an abstract intellectual exercise. It's about understanding ourselves and the world so we can live more fulfilling and meaningful lives.
It's about connecting these big ideas to the everyday choices we make, how we treat each other, the kind of people we want to be in the world. This deep dive has been amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe how relevant Aristotle's ideas still are after all these centuries.
It really is a testament to his brilliance. He tackled some of the most fundamental questions about human existence, and his insights are still with us today.
So if Aristotle were our life coach today, what advice do you think he would give us about living a fulfilling life?
Well, I think he'd encourage us to cultivate our rational faculties, to strive for excellence in everything we do, and to find that all-important balance in life, the golden mean.
Okay, I like that.
He'd also remind us that we're social beings. We thrive in connection with others, and that true happiness isn't something we just stumble upon. It's something we actively create through virtuous action, meaningful relationships, and a lifelong pursuit of knowledge and understanding.
That's amazing advice. Honestly, I might need to write that down and put it in my fridge.
Do it.
Thank you so much for taking us on this incredible journey through the world of Aristotle.
It's been my pleasure.
I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on life, and I think that's a great place to wrap up this deep dive into Aristotle's philosophy. Thanks for listening, everyone.